The Atari 2600, the name itself is legendary. It may not have been the first home console, but it was the first one that mattered. It was the one that took the arcade, that loud, glorious, euphoric temple of fun, and beamed it directly into millions of living rooms. But the console's real magic, its true legacy, wasn't the console itself. It was the games. And more specifically, its uncanny ability to bring that arcade experience home in spite of its limitations. Now, we have to be honest, not all ports were created equal, and some arcade ports were real shitters. For every miracle of programming, there was a flickering, unplayable mess that looked almost nothing like its quarter-sucking parent. But while some ports are famous for being letdowns, a special few were so good they became legends in their own right, pushing the 2600 to do things no one thought was possible. These are the games that brilliant programmers somehow crammed from massive arcade cabinets onto a tiny little cartridge. Today we're counting down the 10 arcade ports that came closest to perfection and cemented the Atari 2600's place in gaming history. Number 10, we have Breakout. Released in 1978. Based on the smash hit arcade game that Atari released in 1976, Breakout was the very first release for the 2600, or should I say the VCS as it was called back then, that would go on to sell over 1 million copies. The console was running between $150 and $200 when Breakout was released in 1978. But even with that hefty price tag, this very popular arcade port probably did help Atari move quite a few more consoles that Christmas. Breakout was originally envisioned to be a single-player Pong game, and the 2600 port does a good job of replicating the arcade experience. As always, the fun in Breakout is trying to create an opening in the wall on the right or left side so you can send the ball over the top for big points. In my opinion, Breakout deserves a spot on this list because it was such a remarkable and cool game for its time. At number 9, we have Berserk, released in 1982.
Intruder alert, intruder alert.
Okay, so the original 2600 version of Berserk is missing the iconic, scary voice from the arcade original. But it more than makes up for it with pure uncut gameplay. The arcade game was a tense, claustrophobic shooter where you were trapped in a maze swarming with killer robots. The 2600 port, running on way simpler hardware, is a masterclass in capturing a game's soul. The mazes are simpler, and the robots can't shoot diagonally, which actually gives you a bit of a fighting chance. But that core tension is still there. You're still frantically running through deadly corridors, blasting robots, and trying to get out of there before the unstoppable Evil Otto shows up. It's fast, addictive, and shockingly accurate in its gameplay feel, proving that a great port is about translating adrenaline, not just pixels. I remember the first time I saw the commercial for Berserk. I was at my friend Jim's house, and we were both blown away by what we saw on the TV. It seemed like his family got the game pretty quickly, so I played it quite a bit over his house back in the day. Coming in at number 8, we have Phoenix, released in 1982. Released in 1982 and adapted from the 1980 arcade game, the 2600 version of Phoenix is scaled down like you would normally expect from any 2600 arcade port, but Phoenix does include all the same stages as the arcade original. Now, back in those days, getting every stage on the home version of an arcade game was never a guarantee. The graphics are bright and colorful, and as far as I can tell, the only thing missing from the Atari 2600 version compared to the arcade are the birds that guard the mothership on the final stage. The game does start out pretty easy, and you also get 5 lives, so you'll need to play for a little while before the challenge ramps up. Phoenix is definitely one of the best arcade ports that was released for the 2600. I know this is a very common question, and we've all heard it talked about over the years, but which do you like better, Phoenix or Demon Attack? Let me know in the comments. At number 7, we have Dig Dug, released in 1983. Dig Dug was such a fantastic arcade game. Since it also had a cuteness factor to it, I remember girls also enjoying the game at my local arcade called Aladdin's Castle back when I was a new teenager. The 2600 version lacks the detail of the arcade version with regards to the way the soil looks, and the boulders are ordinary squares. But when it comes to the gameplay, the programmers at Atari nailed it with Dig Dug. Besides the scale-back graphics, everything else you need to bring the arcade experience home is here. You can rack up big points by strategically trying to crush multiple enemies at once with boulders. All of the bonus vegetables are here, from the carrot in round 1 to the pineapple in round 18. This version even does a good job of replicating the music from the arcade original. You can't go wrong with Dig Dug for the Atari 2600. And coming in at our number 6 position, we have Missile Command, released in 1981. Released in 1980, right in the thick of Cold War anxiety, Missile Command was a terrifyingly tense arcade game. Using a trackball, you defended 6 cities from a relentless storm of nuclear missiles. The Atari 2600 port is a masterpiece of programming. Of course, some things had to be simplified. The 3 missile-based positions from the arcade were consolidated into one, and a joystick is a different animal than a trackball. But the game absolutely nails the feeling of panic and desperation. The sheer speed of the incoming missiles, the strategy of placing your defensive explosions, and the heart-pounding sound effects create an experience that is pure Missile Command. Some even argue that the 2600 version is a more focused, intense experience. It keeps all of the excitement of the original and stands as a masterwork of arcade to home conversion. At number 5, we have Stargate, released in 1984. I was never a fan of Atari's original 1982 release of Defender for the 2600. Now, would I play it sometimes if Chopper Command wasn't available? Sure I would. I still remember the very first time I saw it and played it over at my friend Jim's house. I distinctly remember the first time I saw the explosion of my ship getting destroyed, and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. No, I wasn't expecting it to look as good as the arcade version of the ship exploding, but that was just pitiful. Anyway, the 1984 release of Stargate for the 2600 was a different story entirely. It was also released as Defender 2 later on, and I've never really understood the story about having 2 different releases of the same game. I'm guessing that Williams Electronics, who made the original arcade game, had something to do with this. Let me know in the comments if you know why Atari released it twice. I'm assuming it had to be some kind of copyright thing, but I don't know. The frantic side-scrolling chaos of the arcade is here in full force. The controls are smoother, the action is cleaner, no flickering, and you actually feel like you're in command of your ship. It does a fantastic job of capturing the look and feel of the coin-op, right down to the new alien types and the Stargate that lets you warp across the map. Now, because of the simplicity of the 2600 joystick, Atari had to get creative when it came to using your smart bombs, invisibility, and hyperspace, which I don't recommend using ever. Don't use hyperspace on any arcade game, hardly any of them. Most of it means you're going to die anyway. At least that's my experience. Now, you had to plug in the second controller to use these features in the game. It was obviously very awkward, but I don't hold this against Atari since they didn't have many options back in those days because you only had one button on the original controller. Even with that odd choice, it's a phenomenal port that delivers the challenging high-speed action that made the original game a legend. Now, I've read stories over the years. I've heard it more than once about super diehards of the the Atari 2600 version using their big toe on the second controller to fire the smart bombs. That's pretty good thinking. Anyway, it was a big improvement over the original 2600 Defender, where you had to drop your ship below the city skyline to detonate your smart bombs. Another thing that I learned from reading the manual on Stargate decades ago that I didn't know about when I played the arcade game: if you have a humanoid that has been captured, if you enter the Stargate, it will transport your ship to that spot in the playfield, so you can try to destroy the lander and save the humanoid. I'm sure that this was plainly explained somewhere on the cabinet or on the stream when nobody was playing the arcade game somewhere, but like so many times, I didn't read the directions like I should have. Hey y'all, just wanted to jump in real quick and say, if you haven't hit that like button, please hit the like button. It really helps my video out. And if you are enjoying my stuff and you have not subscribed to the channel, I would be grateful if you would consider subscribing. Okay, let's get back to the countdown. And at number 4, we have Asteroids, released in 1981. That little bastard. Oh, excuse me, got distracted. Asteroids. The original 1979 arcade release was a masterpiece of vector graphics using sharp glowing lines to create a vast, dangerous slip of space. It was one of those classic arcade games that you seem to see everywhere back in the day. If you went to like a convenience store and they had 2 cabinets in the corner somewhere, Asteroids would probably be one of them. It seemed like that's the way it was. Now, bringing that look to the Atari 2600, a machine that had 0 capability for vector graphics, was going to be a monumental challenge for the programmers. What could they possibly come up with that would bring the fun of this great game to the home front? Well, the result was a game that, while looking totally different, still perfectly captures the feel of the arcade original. Your iconic little triangle ship is there, the rocks are now colored blobs, but the core gameplay of blasting, dodging, and just trying to survive is 100% intact. The controls work great with the 2600 joystick, which I always personally prefer to the multiple buttons of the arcade game. My older brother and I were very blessed, and we got an Atari 2600 for Christmas in 1981. We also got a couple of new games with that beautiful 6-switcher, and Asteroids was one of them. We played Asteroids for so long that our parents actually became concerned about us. They wanted us to go outside. This is after, Christmas. You have a week or so, of days off before you go back to school. Oh man, I didn't stop playing Atari. Thank God it was the winter time. There's no yard work to do or anything. It was just so much fun. Now, there is something else I have yet to mention in this video about many of these old 2600 arcade ports that certainly needs to be brought up. What that is are the many game variations they offered. Unfortunately, this seemed like something Atari got away from as time went on, but most of their earlier releases also offered different game variations. On Asteroids, you had the original hyperspace like the arcade, but you could also use shields to defend your ship, which was my personal favorite. And then my older brother's favorite was the 180-degree flip of your spaceship, where you could pull back on the joystick and it would flip to the opposite direction. It was really cool. With Asteroids, Atari proved, as they had already done before, that you didn't have to have an exact copy of the graphics to bring the fun of the arcade home. Here's the game select matrix for the 2600 version of Asteroids. Now, if you remember yourself being badass at this game years ago, but you haven't played it in decades, this is what I want you to do. I want you to plug it in, and I want you to select variation number 4 right there. Basically, that is the asteroids moving in all directions, an extra life at 10,000 points, and you have hyperspace. See how good you do with that one, or if you were nearly as good as you thought you were when you played it as a kid years ago. Let me know in the comments. We're coming down to the wire, y'all. At number 3, we have Miss Pac-Man. Pac-Man, released in 1982. I'm not gonna lie to y'all, when I started doing research for this, I thought that Pac-Man came out at least a year or so before Miss Pac-Man, but apparently they came out just months apart. Pac-Man came out in March of 1982, and Miss Pac-Man came out in July of 1982. Man, that makes the whole thing with the original Pac-Man seem all the more disgusting how awful it was. Now, the 1981 copyright on the Pac-Man cart is apparently when the game was completed, but not released. So that clears it up. I'm getting a little off track here, y'all, but this is really cool and I wanted to share it with y'all. This is a newspaper, the Pensacola News Journal, Sunday, March 28th, 1982. And there's an ad for the original Pac-Man for Atari 2600. Let's see if we can blow this. There we go. Let's see. Maybe even a little bigger. Whoops, not that big. There we go. Start with the excitement of Atari Pac-Man and end up with a free t-shirt only at JCPenney. Here are 2 ways to do it. Purchase Atari Pac-Man video game cartridge and get the thrills of the arcade Pac-Man. That big mouth will eat every dot. Dot? In its path. But beware of Hungry Ghost. $37.95. Step 2, when you buy the Pac-Man cartridge, buy another Atari game cartridge. Or, when you buy the Pac-Man cartridge, buy the Atari video computer system. Step 3, congratulations, you've made it to the exciting finish. Now get a free Pac-Man t-shirt, youth and adult sizes. I bet they didn't have any XXX or triple 4X, which is what I would need now. And at the bottom it says only 150 Pac-Man cartridges available. We have a large shipment due about April 20th and we'll take names and notify upon arrival. Wow. I just thought that was cool. I want to share that with y'all. Now we already know how bad the 2600 port of Pac-Man turned out to be. So when its sequel, Miss Pac-Man, was announced for the 2600, I wasn't getting my hopes up or holding my breath this time around. I don't think anybody was. But when Miss Pac-Man was released, we were all floored with how fantastic it was. This time, it looked like the programmer somehow pulled off a miracle. The graphics are a massive improvement with characters that actually look the way they're supposed to. But the real magic is in the gameplay. It's fast, the controls are responsive, and most importantly, the ghosts finally have their unique personalities from the arcade. Blinky is still aggressive, Peaky still tries to flank you, and Inky and Sue are as unpredictable as ever. It has the multiple mazes, the bouncing fruit, and all the charm of the original arcade game. It doesn't just play like Miss Pac-Man, it feels like Miss Pac-Man, which had all of us scratching our heads and wondering what the hell was Atari doing the first time around. At number 2, we have the official Frogger, released by Starpath in 1983. Now, I understand that this pick might cause some of you to get your underwear in a wad, because this game required a special add-on, the Starpath Supercharger, in order to play it on the 2600. This fantastic upgrade boosted the 2600's memory and let you play bigger games that were loaded from cassette tapes. Now, from a mere standpoint of pure graphics and gameplay, I honestly don't see how anybody could argue that the official Frogger, as it was called, wasn't the best looking arcade port that was ever released for the 2600. Now, I realize the Parker Brothers version of Frogger outsold this copy by a long shot, and it was incredibly popular, but when you compare them side by side, it's just no contest. This version of Frogger looks, sounds, and plays so close to the arcade version that it's just on another level. The iconic theme music also plays throughout the game. This wasn't just a port, it was a statement. It proved that with a little extra horsepower and a ton of programming genius, the Atari 2600 could deliver a truly authentic arcade experience, cementing this game's legacy for all time. And finally, at our number 1 position, we have Space Invaders, released in 1980. This is it. This is the game that sold millions of Atari VCS consoles in 1980 and 1981. While Tato's 1978 arcade original started a cultural phenomenon, it was the 1980 home port of the 2600 version that became the system's first true killer app. Now, to be clear, this port was far from arcade accurate. Some of the earlier entries we've looked at looked way better than this port of Space Invaders did. There were fewer invaders on the screen, and the sprites were a lot bigger and blockier. So what makes it so legendary? It captured the spirit of Space Invaders and allowed everyone to play it at home. If you weren't born in the previous century, you probably just won't understand or get this. But trust me, you just had to be there to understand how big this was when it came out. It shifted the view of the Atari 2600 from being a really neat but just too expensive electronic toy to I've got to come up with the cash to buy this so I can play Space Invaders at home. It seemed like every retailer back in those days had a 2600 set up to play with a small color TV, and Space Invaders was the game that was plugged in. There might be 5 to 10 people stopping by periodically, just to watch people playing the game for a while, just to look at it, to examine it. And some would stay and they wanted to play. They would wait. It was just crazy how popular this game was when it first came out. Another fantastic feature was the incredible 112 game variations with options for 2 players, moving shields, zigzagging shots, invisible invaders, and so much more. This wasn't just a port. It was a whole new package that offered more ways to play the game than the arcade ever did. For many, this massive variety actually made the 2600 version the definitive experience, setting a new bar for what a home arcade port could be.